Welcome, everybody. We're on our Stand for Israel meeting, weekly meeting in Minnesota. We're doing it, today is Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. And since we're doing it over Zoom, we might have also guests not from Minnesota, but this is a meeting where everyone that is interested in Israel and want to support Israel is welcome to join us. So welcome, everyone. We did warn the people that we're recording, ask them to turn off their microphone and camera if they don't want to be seen and be a part of the video. Today we're going to have two topics because it was a very extensive 2 weeks for Israel. The first topic, actually, we're going to have analysis by Elliot Chodoff, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about it. He's one of my favorite speakers on these topics, and he really have an up-to-date analysis for us. And the second thing that I'm going to do, I want to take the opportunity and do a little workshop today about action item and messages that we want to communicate on an ongoing basis. Actually, I will suggest, when we will get to that part of the meeting, I will suggest something new that we have never done before. But before we even dive into that, I want to thank all our co-sponsors. Typically, when we meet in person, and hopefully we'll come back to do it soon, we're meeting at Living Word Christian Center. So special thank you for them, always providing the facility and everything that is needed. But you can see, at least on the screen of all these organizations, they're all great organizations that in one way or another I'm involved with, and it's really a privilege. It's all depend on what we're talking about regarding Israel. We have different people speaking or we're interacting with these various organizations in regards to Israel and the topics that we're talking about. We talked about Zoom. We already did that, so I'm going to skip that slide. And I want to take the opportunity never to forget to thank each and every one of you to actually taking out of your time and joining us on this beautiful spring day in Minnesota. It's almost 80 degrees outside, I guess, even so I was inside all day. So I thank you for that. And beside the organizations that I mentioned, I want to give a very special thank you for Pastor Mack and Pastor Lynn Hammond, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have all these different type of people from different synagogues and churches and different walks of life come together on these ongoing Tuesday meetings to talk about Israel. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. We have an ongoing volunteers, Dave and Nancy Smith. Thank you. They're always there to help us. I very much appreciate that. Good friends. And of course, as a Jewish man, I'm so proud to have as partners in crime for Israel, two wonderful Christian ladies, Joanne Magnuson and Deb Campbell. They love Israel not less than I do. What they do all their days dealing with Israel and helping Israel. And for me as an Israeli man to come here and actually find people that are not Jewish, that care so much about Israel and supporting us, it's giving strength. It's exactly like some of the things that we're going to do today and the rallies that we just talked about that we did here. All this information is going back to Israel. And when Israel is seeing that, it really helped them deal with what they need to deal with. Thank you, Joanne and Deb. Actually, when we will get toward the end of our meeting, I will ask one of them to actually close with prayer. So today, we're going to have up-to-date analysis by an Israeli guest speaker, Elliot Chodoff. He's a political and military analyst. He's specializing in the Middle East conflict and the global war on terrorists. After that, we'll have a group discussion and Q&A. My estimate, that part will be for about an hour. After that, the second part, it's actually a workshop with me. It'll be about 30 minutes. I'm going to throw you a new challenge this time. That's something we've never done before. So I hope you will stay with us and become active in this new challenge that I'm going to add today. Also, people sometimes ask where they can find us, a recording of previous events and all that. All of that is actually on that URL that you see on the screen. If you go there, you will have information about our meetings, www.matmn.org/SFI. SFI stands for Stand for Israel, okay? So without any further ado, I want to talk to you about Elliot. I think many of you probably heard Elliot. If you will ask me, he is the one Israel analyst on that from Israel that I probably had the most here presenting in Minnesota. Today he's going to talk about Israel and the Gaza conflict with Hamas. But he's talking about his expertise. Like I brought him once to Oak Ridge Club. He talked about Iran, and the place was packed. And again, many people were there, not just Israel supporters, people that were just interested in coming to learn and hear him. And the way he presented and the way he taught, you don't even notice that the 1 hour is passing by. It's always very interesting. He doesn't use PowerPoints. I always have to use PowerPoints. He doesn't. He doesn't have any notes. I always have notes. I have something to help me remember. Elliot is pretty much a type of a person that you'll throw a question his way. He's not even prepared. And he's like a walking encyclopedia with his own analysis and understanding of the things. And again, he's always sometimes adding like some humor to it, that making it very, very interesting. Actually, just before COVID started, back in November 2019, I had a special trip to Israel with a couple of friends that were not in Israel for the first time. So I asked Elliot to join us. So for 10 days, we were in one car, just the four of us, traveling all over Israel. And the amount of, by the way, his memory is so great, his knowledge is so great, he actually got licensed also as a tour guide. That's not what he does, but he's actually have his license as a tour guide. You put him anywhere. You put him in the middle of the Jerusalem and tell him, explain, tell us. And he'll tell you things you've never heard before. Again, all of it in a very interesting way. So midnight yesterday, I'm sending him like a satirical article about the Gaza war. I many times don't send it to others because you can very easily misunderstand it. He got it right away. He was laughing so hard. Next thing I know, we start chatting. It was morning time in Israel. And I asked him, he asked me, how am I doing? I told him, I asked him, how is he doing? He said, well, I'm good. I'm just hanging out. I have a presentation to give in an hour and a half over Zoom. He asked me, what am I doing? I told him, well, I was still thinking about our meeting today. And then I just, out of the blue, just came to me and said, hey, Elliot, can I interview you? People didn't see you for some time because you couldn't travel. He said, I'm ready. What do you want to do? So I gave him like 3 things. Told him, here's what I want you to cover. So within 5 minutes, we were on Zoom. By the way, by the time we started, it was like 2:30 a.m. my time. So if I look like a little bit tired, you know why. I'm going to share with you, I recorded that. So imagine him sitting with us, and we're just discussing the situation, covering the 3 points that I wanted to make sure that you all see too. So I'm actually going to change my share here. Now I'm going to stop the share. So first I'm going to see that you're all still there. By the way, give me thumbs up. Are you okay so far? Does that make sense? The introduction makes sense? Great. So I'm going to make sure that I have the video open. Here it is. It's going to look a little bit weird because when I was with him preparing for it, we were actually writing together what I want him to cover. So you'll see like a Word document the first couple of minutes. Good. Welcome, everybody. And today I have a very special guest with me from Israel, from the Galilee area, Elliot Chodoff. Many of you know him. He's one of my favorite speakers regarding anything that have to deal with Israel, but he's specifically a political and military analyst specializing in the Middle East conflict, the global war on terrorists. And since we just finished a very intense 2 weeks in Israel, and actually all over the world, I asked Elliot to brief us and to kind of cut it into 3 parts. Why did it happen when it happened, when the whole thing was starting? And what happened during these 11 days of war, from his point of view, and to give his analysis about the results. So without any further ado, Elliot, it is all yours.
Thanks, Ilan. All right, let me start with the first. Why did it happen, and why did it happen when it happened? And let me start by saying that anybody who gives a single reason doesn't understand what's going on. And I want to sort of broaden that for a moment and say that in general, what are called monocausal explanations, in other words, there's one cause for something happening, are usually way too inadequate. I believe that they're the result of lazy teachers and college professors who want one right answer on the test. So here what I want to do is build a structure of why it happened and why it happened now. Let's start with the foundation stone of the structure, and that is that Hamas is fundamentally a genocidal, exterminationist, anti-Semitic organization whose ideological roots are in Nazism. And I say all of that, references available on request. So it could happen with them at any time because that's their raison d'etre. They live for that. And you don't have to go very far, just read their charter and you can see it in there. So that's, again, that's our foundation. Iran is a supporter, a funder, an equiper of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, by the way. And the fact that those two organizations went in lend more weight to what I'm about to say, and that is that Iran was pushing for them to do something. Now, the reason Iran was doing it is because we've been beating Iran up in Syria and to some extent in Iran over its encroachment on Syrian territory, trying to get closer to our border, its nuclear program, it's supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, and not support is not just verbal, it's financial, it's physical, it's material. And we've been essentially at war with them, fighting war for a few years now. We've been technically at war since the day Khomeini came to power. And this gave them an opportunity to shift our attention heavily, essentially 180 degrees geographically from the northeast to the southwest, to Gaza. The next layer in our structure are the Palestinian elections that were supposed to be held and were canceled. Abu Mazen, the head of the PA, is in the 15th year of his 4-year term and was under tremendous pressure, not only from the opposition from Hamas, but also from opposition within his party, Fatah, his organization, because, you know what, a leader who's been in a position for 15 years and has his people around him means that there's no room for the next generation, if you will, to move up into leadership positions. So a lot of pressure on him in that. So he declared elections for June, about 6 months earlier, and very, very quickly found out that he was going to lose. Now, I don't want to go into the Palestinian election issues because there are a number of reasons why he was going to lose, but Hamas was going to win, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. So now he needed a way out. And he couldn't just get up and say, hey, I'm going to lose, so I'm canceling elections. So instead, he fell back on a tried and true excuse. He blamed Israel. Shocking, isn't it? He blamed Israel and specifically blamed Israel for not letting the PA open polling places in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is, if you're going to blame Israel, Jerusalem is always a good card to play with that, because it's sort of it's a catchword for everything, and it works for everyone on the other side. Into that was the issue of the real estate dispute that's going on in Sheikh Jarrah, the so-called ethnic cleansing of 4 families, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because no matter what you think, and I don't want to go into that story in depth here either, an issue that involves 4 families is not ethnic cleansing. Period. It could be many, many, many things. It's not that. Add to that it was Ramadan. It was coming to the end of Ramadan. The celebrations of the end of Ramadan coincided perfectly with Jerusalem Day. And add to that a perceived divisive situation in Israel because of the political process. And here I emphasize the word perceived. And a perception that America is going soft on Israel. And here again, I'm going to emphasize the word perception. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. In other words, how the Biden administration behaved could be debatable, but largely, and I'll sort of skip to the end, largely worked with Israel and for Israel. But the voices coming out of Congress, the voices coming out of opposition from within the president's party give a very strong impression that America is going soft. And the impression is what counts here, not the reality. So I don't even want to go into, is it a fact or isn't it a fact? So this essentially created a perfect storm. And Hamas, in order to regain its position, because by using Jerusalem as his sort of leverage point, Abu Mazen kind of passed Hamas in the religious lane. Now, remember, Fatah is nominally a secular organization. I say nominally. Hamas is an Islamic organization. So for them to be passed by a secular organization put them in very, very bad light in the Palestinian population. So they needed to regain their position. Now, one of the theories, and actually some of the research that I'm doing, argues that the internal between group competition, and not just here, in general, among terrorist organizations, for lack of a better term, will sometimes even trump the conflict and the conflict relationship between those terrorist organizations and their primary adversary, in this case, Israel. In other words, it was more important for Hamas to get on the boards because of Fatah than because of Israel at this particular moment. The result was the rocket fire, which led to the response that it did. And here, I know there's a lot of blaming of Netanyahu for this, that he's doing it for all sorts of personal reasons, legal reasons, political reasons, and so on. I don't believe that he had anything to do with the outbreak, but I think that politics, and not just his, but politics, certainly had a role to play in the decision-making along the way. And this goes back to every leader of every country in history. In other words, domestic politics is just part of your decision-making. It can't not be part of your decision-making. So the Israeli response was to strike at Hamas. Hamas, because it could not back down at this point, because it needed to regain its position vis-a-vis Fatah, begins an upward spiral. Add a little Iranian pushing to that, and we have an 11-day campaign.
Now, before we go into the 11 days, Elliot,
Yes.
two things. You talked about meaning the kind of competition between the Palestinian groups.
Yes.
I also read some information that actually within the Hamas itself was kind of a competition regarding do they have some of the moderates gaining power and the ones that are more militants kind of wanted to gain back their,
Right. Yeah, there's certainly competition within the organization. The so-called military wing is adamant about trying to maintain its position. As long as there's no fighting going on, the non-military aspects come to the fore. And again, this is just sort of the nature of that sort of a beast. Unlike a state in which the military is subordinate to the government and basically is supposed to do what it's told, or there'll be a military takeover, right? Here you have two factions vying for legitimacy with each other without a sort of a superior government in control. Now, it should be clear, the non-military wing of Hamas is just as exterminationist, anti-Semitic as the military wing. They're basically, what we're seeing there, and there's no better way to describe this, is institutional politics. In other words, each group wants their own institutional and personal position to be more important than the others within an organization, not in terms of competing over what their ultimate objectives are. So yeah, there's certainly that going on.
And the other thing I was going to ask you, if you think that also makes sense, is that, in the last 12 months, Hamas kind of, I'm sure, took really badly all the Abraham Accords. And in addition to that, suddenly there's an Arab party within Israel that is willing both to talk to the right and the left in Israel and partners with Jews and saying, you know what, we accept Israel now as Arabs internally. You think all that also kind of affected the timing of the whole thing?
It certainly did, but I would put that at a very sort of minor level. it's in there. I don't even think that it's on the level of the straw that broke the camel's back. It's more along the lines of, and comes back to where we started from, this, and the idea of many causes leading to a certain action or decision, and that's not only on a national or international level, it's also on a personal level. We do things based on lots of factors that come into play, and often enough, once we start to do something, there are factors that sort of attach themselves to that as well. They weren't the cause of the decision, but it's like, okay, well, if I'm doing it already, you know what? If I'm going out to pick up groceries, I might as well stop and pick up a book.
So that's actually bringing me to the last question regarding this. You talked about multiple factors that brought it, not one, right? So actually, some of these factors were building up for some time. Do you think then it was all very well planned by Hamas, or was it more a spontaneous thing?
No, I think it was spontaneous. I think that the trigger, which was the elections added to Jerusalem and Sheikh Jarrah and what happened on the Temple Mount, were what is known in strategy as a streetcar. And the reason it's called a streetcar is if you miss it, don't worry, another one will come along.
The reason I was asking about it is because I noticed that just, they knew when Jerusalem Day will take place, right?
Yes.
They knew Ramadan is taking place. They knew all these other factors. And I noticed even 2 or 3 weeks even before that they start flaring the streets within Israel. They actually literally were trying to create, they were trying to push, they're trying to make that streetcar, right? They're trying to make sure.
For sure.
One.
But remember that they also knew by that point that the elections were going to be canceled. In other words, I don't think it was spontaneous on the level of that day, but it was spontaneous on the sense of the convergence that was going to lead to it was known a few weeks, maybe a month in advance.
And that's what I meant. What I meant is that probably for weeks, when they started flaring the streets, even weeks before firing the first rocket,
yes,
they already have something that they're hoping that will happen, which did happen.
Right.
So what happened is this. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. No, I would just say that I'm not convinced that they knew exactly what they were going to do on that day well in advance. In part because I think if they had planned it at that level, we probably would have picked it up with intelligence. But it was clear that something was going to happen on the way, and that intelligence did pick up. Now, it could have been rioting in Gaza. It could have been something along the fence, in which case this whole picture would have been very different. They ultimately decided to fire rockets at Jerusalem, and that was a game changer.
So what happened just during these 11 days?
So during these 11 days, a few things happened. First of all, they fired 4,000 rockets into Israel, or at Israel, because a bunch of them fell in Gaza. The 4,000 rockets is the equivalent of what Hezbollah fired at us in 2006 over 35 days. So it gives you an idea. The intensity of rocket fire per day was much higher in this than it was in the war in 2006. The Iron Dome did an excellent job, although they certainly attempted and succeeded in flooding the Iron Dome zones so that its immediate effectiveness in some areas dropped, and that caused much more damage.
And some of the very spectacular video footages that were posted of the Iron Dome trying to intercept that,
yes,
making their way around the net. Yes,
absolutely. But again, a limited number of interceptors that can be fired in any particular time. We're talking about rocket flight times of 15, 20, 30 seconds. So there's no flexibility from the Iron Dome perspective. And this, of course, has ramifications for the next round with Hezbollah, which has a 10 times greater rocket capability than Hamas did.
So will more Iron Domes will be needed then to be able to cover a more heavy frequency and amount of rockets being shot at the same time?
Look, the short answer is yes. The long answer is it won't make that much of a difference. In other words, here's a basic law of economics. They can produce or acquire rockets much faster at a much greater rate than we can build and supply Iron Domes. So eventually it's a self-defeating strategy. And of course we struck back. Now the striking back has, I would say, two elements to it. And they're both built on the idea of deterrence, which, as you know, is one of my fields. But the first thing we need to realize is the strikes themselves are not deterrent. In other words, one of the great misunderstandings, and I've read a few articles about this already, once the shooting begins, the retaliation very often has very little effect on the extent of the shooting that's going on. Okay, in other words, the psychology of the tit for tat, we're going to take out a building, they have to fire more rockets at that point. They're not going to back down because they went into it in the first place to show that they have, this power and this capability. What we did was essentially two things. One is that we degraded their ability to do this one more time. Now, that's not permanent. It means that we've set them back however long, and whatever the estimates are, and whatever you've read, and I've read months, and I've read years. I don't believe any of it because it doesn't take the other side into account. But it certainly set them back, and it should be clear here also, many of the rockets that they fired were built in Gaza and not in workshops, in factories. There's a big difference. Once upon a time, we saw what were called Qassam rockets, which were made in metal shops. They were, the New York Times would refer to them as homemade, kind of like, children's model rockets. Not true, but they were certainly not made to a very high standard. This round, they were making actual Katyusha rockets in factories using Iranian blueprints. They also had weapons that were smuggled in. In other words, they have a weapons production capability that they didn't have 6-7 years ago. If you believe the reports, and I do, we destroyed it. We've set that back completely.
Now, do you mean the manufacturing?
The manufacturing,
okay.
Yes. We also destroyed stores of weapons.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what all that means is that they learned, as Hezbollah learned, that when you go into an operation with Israel, you need 3 times as many as you think you need, so that Israel can destroy 2/3 of them, and you'll still have as much as you need. And that's pretty basic calculation. By the way, American nuclear theory was built on that also, in terms of having enough to survive a Soviet strike, that there'll still be enough to launch. It's a pretty basic arithmetic as far as that goes. We then took out the leaders, and here again, taking out leaders has a direct effect, heads of technology, heads of military units, and the like. It also has a future effect. It's a threat that carries into the future. We destroyed about 100 kilometers of what we call the metro, which was their underground, their tunnel network.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that people understand, because when they hear metro, many times they think about civilian metro in France or something like that. We're talking about a militant tunnels built as a bunkers and rooms and the whole facility underground.
Right.
Now, what does it mean, Elliot, when Israel was able to destroy 100 kilometers of these tunnels? What is the meaning of that?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to relate to what you just said because it's very important. Very often in the military, and particularly in Israel, but everywhere, military kind of targets or events are given slang term nicknames. So just like we called the Hezbollah fortifications in South Lebanon the nature reserves, because nobody was allowed in Lebanon was allowed into them. So this was called the Metro. Again, not because those were nature reserves and not because this was a metro, but this was their underground transit network. So they could move forces from one area to another and within Gaza and from Gaza into Israel, completely underground, presumably they thought, without us knowing anything about it. Okay. So first of all, destroying 100 kilometers of it means we had a very, very good idea, not only of where it was in general, but where it was in particular, because destroying a tunnel means a direct hit on the tunnel. So that's number one. Number two, it sets them back. This was many, many years of digging, of construction. And if they're going to do it again, they've got to invest many, many years again into digging it. It means that we penetrated their information centers very, very deeply. Now, whatever that means, whether it's collaborators, spies, electronics, observation, all of the above. So we knew exactly what was where. And that should also concern them a bit. Too bad about them. We took out centers, and the most famous one, of course, was the building which AP and Al Jazeera were in. That was a building from which they had electronics jamming GPSs. They had electronics warfare operating out of there, intelligence services, technological services, and I'm sorry, that's a military target. And the fact that AP didn't like it, that's their problem. Next time, they should be a little more careful about who their neighbors are when they rent space.
Yeah, and I heard some people that their expertise, not even Israelis, that talked about it. I saw an expert on CNN saying as soon as any building is being used by a military, it becomes a military target if you want it or not.
Right. According to all the rules of war, international law, military ethics, there's a very, very simple rule, and that is that the presence of civilians does not protect a military target. The presence of a military target endangers civilians. Now, how many and what, there's an involved debate in just war theory and military ethics, but in this case, it wasn't a debate. People were warned, told to get out of the building. They left the building and the building was brought down. So it doesn't even step into the realm of cost-benefit analysis in terms of casualties. So purely a military target, and a bunch of them were taken out. The homes of some of the leaders were destroyed. In other words, personal damage. Let them know also we know where you live, in the very literal sense. And then it wound down, and it was kind of predictable. I'll say one way or the other. Israel had two options. Either launch a ground operation, which I think by 10 days in, it was too late, or end it because of a basic law of diminishing returns. In other words, the Air Force took out the targets that it was assigned. There are always more targets, but the quality, the value of the targets keeps going down. The possibility of a mistake, and by the way, here let's keep in mind on both sides, the possibility of us hitting, and we saw it in Lebanon in Operation Accountability, Din V'Cheshbon in '93. We saw it again in '96 in Grapes of Wrath. The accidental killing of civilians in an area that we were or weren't aware of, well enough aware, accurate enough, it doesn't matter. It wasn't intentional, but the civilians were just as dead, and the shift in balance vis-a-vis Israel was instantaneous. So now the question becomes, do you continue risking that happening by going after secondary targets, tertiary targets, and so on and so forth?
And
there's
actually,
also yeah, go ahead.
I actually want to emphasize what you just said, because I was going to ask you about it if you were not going to bring it up. You know, I know that in previous campaigns, not just in Israel, in many other places in the world, when it was such a complicated war zone, right, when the militants are actually hiding behind civilians. It's so hard to avoid mistakes. There are always mistakes. This time, I couldn't even find one mistake. All
Right.
targets that Israel hit were what was considered to be a military target, even by
Correct.
international law. Meaning, and I don't know what Israel did, but I thought it would almost be impossible to operate in an environment like that with no mistakes at all. I couldn't even find one mistake.
Okay.
Am I wrong?
I'm with you. Look, there was also that operation to draw them out with the fake ground offensive. Keep in mind, the sole purpose of that business was to get the Hamas terrorists out of the populated area so they could be hit on the outside. Okay, because the tunnels that were hit, we could have hit anyway. The tunnels weren't more tunnel or less tunnel because of the deception. Okay, but the idea was to bring them out of the populated area and hit them in their own places so there wouldn't be civilian casualties. Obviously, there were some, and by the way, many of them caused by Hamas rockets that fell in Gaza. I don't want to get into precise numbers, but the number, given the scale of the operation, was very, very low. Unavoidable, and very, very low. Targets were not hit. Here again, when you have a huge target list, civilians showed up in a target area, and there were some recordings of that made the circuit as well. The attack was called off, and you can do that when you have a large target list, and when you can say, tomorrow's another day, we'll take out the target tomorrow. Eventually, all of those were hit. In other words, the upper level of that list. So again, you reach a point of diminishing returns. And let's not forget there's a flip side to it. A Hamas rocket that makes it through the Iron Dome and hits a hospital or hits an apartment building and takes it out and kills 30, 40, 50 people. You've gone a day too long. So that curve was sort of on the way down. I'm going to, without getting into American politics, but American policy, the statement from the White House that the president had told Netanyahu that he expected a de-escalation and a ceasefire that day, in my personal opinion, lengthened the operation by one day.
Yeah, because Netanyahu cannot stop immediately after that. He have to wait and to show that his decision was based on their own decision and not by pressure.
Exactly. And by the way, I don't think it's a Netanyahu issue. I don't think any leader under those circumstances.
No, but in this case, it was Netanyahu.
No, I'm saying it was Netanyahu because it was Netanyahu, but
Yeah.
I don't think it was personally him. I think that it was any leader in that position. And here I want to make clear, and I said something very specific, and I want to make very clear. It wasn't what Biden said to Netanyahu. It was that the White House publicized it as a public statement. Okay? Leaders of friendly nations can have all sorts of conversations between them, but the minute it goes into a press release that was also repeated by the American embassy in Jerusalem, in other words, it was made very, very clear to everyone, America is putting pressure on Israel to end it today, meant that Israel could not end it that day.
They would end it on the next day.
Right, but it's, as I said, in my opinion, it lengthened it by an additional day.
But the pressure was becoming stronger and stronger to stop.
Of course, and again, I think that the pressure was also a result, it was a result of domestic politics in the United States, it was a result of many things, but I think it was also a result of the American leadership, military and civilian, coming to the same conclusion that I was talking about earlier, and that is, okay, we're going into a diminishing returns situation. Now it's time to wind this down. They weren't putting pressure on Israel early on. When Israel was taking out high quality targets, and America wasn't saying anything.
Now, during these 11 days, I also had the feeling, I might be wrong, but correct me, that compared to other campaigns, actually world leaders were more sympathetic with Israel and Israel need to respond and do what they need to do than compared to all the shouts that started in previous campaigns immediately on day 1 or 2.
Correct.
Many leaders told Israel, okay, you need to go and do what you need to do. Is that what you saw too?
That's what I saw too. Although I have to say, in the operation against Hezbollah in '06, it was also the case. Until, again, it went too long.
Until Condoleezza Rice called Olmert, told him stop.
Okay, but that was very late in the game. And there was a sense in Israel as well that this is starting to just grind on without going anywhere. I think, and there is a certain parallel to the two, but I want to focus on what just happened. I think that there are two outcomes that are important here, and I started from these, so let me conclude with them. One is that we've degraded their capability. In other words, no matter what they believe, they are less capable today than they were a few weeks ago. That's physical. And that has its impact. A lot of damage was done to many things, infrastructure. Interestingly enough, many of their tunnels were built under roads, so the roads were destroyed. And we know that there were tunnels under them because the roads collapsed into the tunnels. So there's a lot of rebuilding that they need to do just to keep that will keep them occupied. And that's on the physical side.
So you mean a new few millionaires in Gaza?
Yes. And Hamas taking its cut, obviously. But on top of that, there is the more coercive side of it, which has worked so far against Hezbollah as well since 2006. And that is raising the cost in their minds to doing something. Now, I don't believe that when they fired the rockets at Jerusalem on the beginning of this on Jerusalem Day, they saw what was going to be 11 days later. I don't believe that. And if you remember, after the war in '06, Hassan Nasrallah gave a famous interview saying, if I had known that would be the Israeli response, I never would have launched the first attack in the first place.
Which is rare for
very rare.
That is really rare.
Yes. And it was a TV interview in Lebanon because he had to explain to his own population why they got beat up the way they got beat up. So I don't see the Hamas leadership doing something like that. But I do think that in their own minds, they're going to weigh their actions differently than they did before. Now, will it last forever? No, nothing lasts forever. Will they start challenging us? I believe that they will start challenging us in the not too distant future. And there a lot also comes back to us. How do we respond to the challenges? Do we say, and this is a policy that I've opposed all along through Israel's history, do we say, oh, the rocket fell in an open area, it doesn't, no blood, no foul? Or do we say, anything you shoot at us, we're going to treat as if it hit a target? And now, of course, the word is military and political in Israel that we're going to do the latter, not the former. Time will tell. We'll see if our actions meet up and follow our words. But there's a potential here, at least, for pushing quiet a considerable distance into the future. I don't want to put timelines on it because the Middle East, those are always dangerous.
And actually, if I'm thinking about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2006, Hezbollah got hit really hard, but it was during many days. I think we couldn't penetrate their bunkers. Then we didn't have any at the time. We didn't have the right things to penetrate deep in the ground to hit their bunkers and all that. So actually, it might be that the setback of the Hamas right now, it's even worse than what Hezbollah experienced in 2006. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think it is much worse. But remember, there are a few things. One is the munitions have changed, but also let's not compare the two on a different level. And I want to conclude with this. We say Hamas and Hezbollah almost in the same breath. But we're talking about two very different organizations in two very, very different circumstances. And I want to talk about the circumstances more than the organizations. Because talking about the organizations isn't a lecture, it's a course, maybe even a full degree. Gaza is a tiny, flat area bordered by the sea on one side and by us on two sides, and Egypt on the fourth. But it's small, it's flat, you can see across it. In other words, we have a very, very, very good idea what's going on in there, and we can almost physically see everything that's happening. Lebanon is a larger country. It's not a huge country, but it's a country. The terrain is difficult. There are forests, there are mountains. In Gaza, there are three major cities: Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Rafiah, and a bunch of towns and villages around them, suburbs, neighborhoods. Lebanon, by contrast, is huge. You have major cities, you have towns, you have villages, as I said, mountains, forests. It's much, much more difficult for Israel to get a very, very clear sense of what's happening in there. Where in Gaza, we're pretty much focused on them, and they're right next to us. So as I tell colleagues in the U.S. military, your enemies are based halfway around the world in countries that, if you're lucky, you hold an outpost here and there inside of them. Our enemies are right on top of us, which has its pros and cons, of course, but from the intelligence point of view, we see everything that's going on in Gaza visually, electronically, personally. And that means striking Hamas in that way is much, much easier than going after Hezbollah.
Now, going back to what you started with, and just to kind of your analysis, so with everything that happened, how does that affect the power balance between Fatah and Hamas? And how does that affect maybe other places outside of Gaza? Are we now expecting more trouble in Judea and Samaria, or what do you think about that?
We are. First of all, Hamas has overtaken Fatah again. As a matter of fact, Fatah had no choice, Abu Mazen had no choice but to join in the victory celebrations. Remember, it doesn't matter what the real outcome is. There's always going to be a victory celebration. And there were Hamas flags flying in Ramallah during the celebrations. That's a major blow to Fatah. Now, since Judea and Samaria is outside the arrangement of the rules that we have with Hamas, because nominally Judea and Samaria is under control of Fatah and the PA, even though it's not completely the case, we're likely to see much more terrorist activity. We've already seen an uptick of terrorist activity in Judea and Samaria, because that's what's known in the deterrence strategy as working around deterrence. Okay, then if they fire a rocket out of Gaza, we have a response. But if one of their guys shoots somebody in Judea and Samaria, we're not going to bomb Gaza as a result. So that's part of the workaround. So to be clear, they're not changing. It's not like we beat them up and they're now going to go back to school and become, social workers and accountants and things like that. They're now sitting and thinking, how do we now operate under these new circumstances until we can get the situation back to where we wanted it to be? In other words, turn the clock back to before this.
Great. So meaning, I don't know if you want to add anything to your analysis. I was just going to wrap up with one little thing.
Okay, wrap up, because I need
because you need because
to get going.
I love having that. I love having you, the meeting that we have and information, but nothing can kind of be better than actually seeing you in person. You used to visit us very often here in the US and come to here. And this is just one thing, but one thing that just happened. I'll be even more interested to hear an in-depth analysis of Iran and all the other things. There's so many things that you can share with us. Now with the situation, COVID, Israel handled COVID so well and like almost back to normal. And the US is also kind of heading in that direction. Are you planning on starting to renew your trips to the US? We didn't see you.
I am. As soon as the situation clarifies itself well, which I'm going to guess is going to be after the summer, I'm going to start planning regular visits, including lecture tours.
And also, I had it was a privilege for me many times coming to Israel, actually seeing you meeting people that coming from the US to Israel.
Yes.
And you go and you speak. Many times you take them to different places. You do a whole tour or a few days.
Yes.
Do you know if Israel will open up to it or
We're starting to. Here again, I think, look, in Israel, we have basically beaten it. Yesterday's statistics, by the way, I went for a corona test yesterday because I'm coming to the States for personal reasons. And I just got the negative results. Negative is good, right? But the mortality rate for corona in Israel as of yesterday was averaging 2 per day over the previous week. The infection rate is ranging at around 20 people a day on the average. In other words, we've essentially beaten it. Now, life is full of surprises, and of course, politicians, and here I say that understandably, are not just going to, switch from 100 to 0 overnight, but slowly but surely we're beginning to lift restrictions, and that's including things like if you show a negative test 72 hours within 72 hours before boarding a plane, you're basically okay. I think that trend is going to continue and improve. Look, Israel needs tourism. There's no question of that. So I think that as confidence builds here, restrictions are going to drop off more and more.
I looked at it because I'm planning on coming visiting at the end of August, and it looks very, meaning the terms that they have, the airline that I checked is actually making it look like a very feasible option, like you can do that. So do you think there are any chances, because I have so many friends that are just dying to go to Israel again. They miss going to Israel. It's like such a great experience, especially if you go and you meet people like you that have so much knowledge to share on the ground. Do you think there's any chance that you will have any of your tours or anything like that still this year?
Look, I've got one scheduled for October. I don't know if it's going to happen again because the corona issue is still active in many ways. Not the issue, not the disease. In terms of restrictions and limitations, and there are people who are still considering not traveling and that sort of thing. But I believe that by the end of the year, maybe earlier, but by the end of the year, keeping in mind that for planning purposes, if I don't have it set up in the next week or two, then I'm 4 or 5 months down the road can't happen. So we have to roll with that. But I'm guessing that toward the end of this year, we're going to see a complete opening and complete change.
And I'm going to be so happy to see that. That's going to be amazing. I know so many people. Yeah. So Elliot, thank you so much.
Ilan, thank you.
I know you have a presentation starting soon.
Yes.
It's 3:30 in the morning.
Go to sleep.
But no, meaning it was worse. It was worth it. Meaning it was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you again.
Always. You too.
And mazel tov for your personal visit to the US.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye. I'm here, guys. I'm gonna unmute everybody in a moment. So before we go to the, let's see. You can actually, what I did, I allowed you to unmute yourself if you have any questions or comment or anything that you want to say about this conversation. Was it worthwhile recording it? For me, it was from 3:30 in the morning, right?
Absolutely.
What's your feedback on that? Questions?
That was a really good presentation.
Yes.
I learned so much.
Great. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we kind of jump to the next topic?
I thought it was amazing. And this is Diane Hickman. I'm in San Diego, California. I thought it was amazing. And I think it's also very encouraging news.
Yeah.
Good, great. I see here, well, that was someone sent me something in a chat, but that's not a question. Good. So if we don't have any more questions, I want to jump and do the next thing, which is a little workshop. Remember this car street scenario that Elliot was using in his presentation, saying, well, they're ready. They just need to decide which car, street car, is that the right? Street car, right? Which street car to jump on. But when you're waiting for a street car, you're ready, right? You're ready to jump. And what I was trying to message in the last couple of weeks is that when they were ready, it's not just from a military point of view, because they're ready for that streetcar to show up in the public opinion point of view. And I felt like we were not ready. It took us time. By the way, I get people. Do you hear some people talking?
I got accepted for
Here, okay, great. So it took us here some time, and you saw that the public opinion, especially in the beginning, it took time for the ones that are pro-Israel to kind of to send their messages, be ready, and decide send out. So I thought it's time for us. I almost feel like we're kind of quiet in between, and every time something happened in Israel, we're saying, okay, now we have to do something. But then we kind of go almost like under the radar. We don't say a lot. We sometimes even prefer that people won't even hear about us, right? Or hear about Israel or think about Israel. And I'm thinking maybe it's something that we need to change. Maybe that's something that we can think of and do that properly. So when I was actually looking at what the pro-Palestinian side was doing, they have their own slogans, repeating again and again, very short, that make anyone that doesn't even understand the conflict kind of more relate to them, right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So I was trying to think what will happen, and I want you to listen to that because I'm actually going to start giving assignments here for people that are willing to take that. What I'm going to do is once a week when we meet, we're going to decide upfront about one thing that we want to talk about next week. How do we handle that? And then like about 10, 15 minutes in each meeting to say, here's the topic that we all need to learn how to answer that. I'll come and tell you, hey, Israel is an apartheid state. How do you answer that, right? How do you answer that to a person that actually doesn't know a lot? Or even if you don't have all the information, you're saying, you know what, I just need enough to be able to counter that, right? To explain to them what is really going on. So I'm actually going to show you a few examples that I created in the last few days for that. They might be good, they might be bad. But what I want to do for next week, I want to ask for one or two of you to pick up something else that you hear a lot of against Israel, being told against Israel, and then promise us that these one or two people will come back to us next week and will present. To encourage you to do that, I promise you that if you volunteer to do that, that myself and even if Joanne or Deb, if they want, we can help you with it before the meeting. So you don't feel overwhelmed. We can even help you prepare that. We can mentor you on that. But then you present it. And then you present it next Tuesday. And we have the one thing that we all want to push and do. We're all doing it on Tuesday. So every Tuesday, suddenly all social media and all that, communicating one very specific pro-Israel message. And all our friends, everyone that we know is actually going out there and to do it on a weekly basis, every week. By the way, it's okay after 4 weeks to repeat the same message because sometimes it takes 5-6 times to a person to listen to something until it's really sinks in. So it's okay that if we do something next week, then we do something else for the next 2-3 weeks. And then again, we repeat the same one. So does that make sense, by the way? You're interested, like try to see this short workshop that I prepared for that. So yes, yes.
Can I just make a comment at this point?
Sure.
I think that's an excellent idea. And one of the things I've learned over this last year, remembering I'm at least one of the oldest people on this call, and I cut my teeth during World War II. I was born in 1937, And I sat with my grandmother listening to the war news every night during the war and prayed for Israel. Uh, and one of the things I realized after World War II was nobody wanted to talk about it. Oh, well, let's buy a new car with lots of chrome. Let's get a house in the suburbs. Life's okay now. Like we had this one bad thing, and now everything should be okay. And should be okay became normal. And I think this last year has reminded me that normal in a fallen world is always there's another war, there's another crisis coming. And that doesn't mean we should be, on high blood pressure all the time, but we need to realize what normal is. And normal in a fallen world is not, oh, well, in a year or two from now, we're going to have it all figured out and we're all going to live in the Garden of Eden or something like it. And I think preparing the answers to the questions that people are asking, because if I think like this, and to me it was kind of a revelation, and I've been pretty aware of things for the last 80 years, we really have to be prepared to think this isn't an emergency, this is life, and life will continue to give us problems, and preparing the answers to the questions is an absolutely wonderful and necessary idea. So
thank you, Joanne. So, and yeah, I agree. And again, the point is not to make all of us an Elliot Chodoff, right?
No.
We know everything, we have all the details. We just need to know enough how to present a point that is countering what is being said against Israel. And actually, as you can see, one of my examples is not even countering, it's actually being proactive. Instead of always countering what they're saying, trying to protect Israel, being always on the defense, instead of being that, maybe do something that we come up with, right? So I wanna start here with an example, okay, and a couple of examples, and I'm gonna share my screen again. And by the way, so first I said, what kind of actions does Israel need from us today? And actually, from all the three, really the middle one is that we're going to do a workshop on. I still want to mention the first and the third one. If any person here is a part of an organization that can make official statements, it's important that official statements will come out from organizations and will be put out there. For example, in the last few days, you've probably seen almost the same wording against anti-Semitism, because a lot of Jews were attacked in weeks. And you have almost the same language also coming out from a lot of official statements, all the way from the White House to various organizations. It didn't just happen. Somebody was asking, somebody was pushing, saying, these official statements are important. So keep that in mind if you can. Again, but it has nothing to do with our workshop. The third point is the demonstrations of solidarity with Israel. And typically it happens when things are really like tense, right? Like in the last couple of weeks. We need to think about some other ways of doing that, but again, it's not the part of the workshop. The part of the workshop, I want to concentrate and focus on the second point. Supporting it in a tweet, Facebook post, or any other social media. Be active there if you are there. Or actually, different people have their way of spreading the word in any other ways. And I think that what we're going to talk about today will cover all this. So example number one, actually, I started with the most complicated example, with the one that have the most information. But the ones after that are going to be You can hear feedback. Somebody had probably two devices in one room, and that's what happened. That's how this echo is being created. So I'm sorry about that. So the first thing is apartheid. That's a word that the other side uses a lot against Israel. But let's take a look at this definition. Where can minority live? If you start analyzing it and look at that. In Israel, you have Jews, you have Muslims, you have Christians, you have Druze, you have Bedouins, you have Samaritans, Cherkessian. All the minority religions that were mentioned actually had increased in numbers. Okay? Gays are accepted. Israel is the only country in the Middle East actually have a gay parade. It's not allowed in any other country in the area. Women have leadership roles in politics and business. This is Israel. Now, if you look at the other side, in Gaza under Hamas, no Jews are allowed. Actually, the only Jews that are there are ones that were captured by Hamas and are being held as prisoners. Christians have pretty much disappeared. Gays are being executed. Women are second class. And even if you're a Muslim, but you happen to support the rivalry party like a Fatah, you can see videos of them, of Hamas people, throwing off a devoted Muslim from Gaza, from a rooftop, just because they're members of Fatah. So I'll ask regarding on that point, if you take a look at these two environments, okay, Gaza under Hamas or Israel, regarding minority where they can live, I think the definition of apartheid is more appropriate actually for Gaza, not for Israel. Talking about property, there was a property dispute that they're trying to claim that was a part of all that. Well, Israel has a democratic court. Supreme Court in Israel have an Arab judge. Other courts also have judges from other minorities. If there's a property dispute, like you have in any democracy, you have property dispute. Here in the US, you have property dispute. The court decides based on the law, which does not consider your religion. So sometimes the Jewish plaintiff will win, sometimes the Muslim, sometimes the Christian. However, what we see here is that when the Muslim side loses, the Hamas propaganda machine is brainwashing like naive people to believe that there was an injustice. There was no injustice in this case. I want to ask you, what happened here if you have an ongoing property dispute and the law and the court says that the families have to pay rent and they're refusing to pay? They will be evicted. And that's exactly what happened in Israel. So Israel behaved exactly like any other democracy will do on property disputes. Oh, but when we go and look at Gaza under Hamas, no Jew allowed to own any property, period. What looks and smells more like an apartheid here? I think that will be Hamas. Government. Israel has Knesset, the parliament members. They have mayors, elected officials, police, and soldiers of all religions. Again, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Bedouins, Samaritans, Cherkessians, they're all serving, many of them serve in the military, or even the minorities, in the police, elected official. Gaza under Hamas, no Jews allowed at all. So, yeah, again, severe decline of other minorities, so they don't have any representation. And again, if you're not a Hamas supporter, you will be discriminated against. So again, if we're talking here about apartheid, it's obviously that Gaza is more fitting to that. Treating your citizen, again, I'm not going to get into that. It's the same thing. You know, Israel protects all its citizens. Doesn't matter who you are, what you are, okay? What's your political opinion? No matter what your sexual orientation is, young and old. Gaza under Hamas, they actually sacrifice their own citizens. Okay, they will use children, civilians, and other innocents as human shields, while investing millions of dollars in protecting only their leadership, okay? Now, all that is, again, as I told you, the first example is going to be a long one. But what I'm trying to do is find a way to say all that in a very short way so people can relate to that easily and it can help you. So what I'm saying, by the way, bottom line, yes, Israel is not perfect, but it is a democracy. US, Britain, and other democracies are not perfect too, but I will not call any of them apartheid states, right? On the other hand, Hamas is an apartheid state, okay? So I'm saying, instead of saying all that, we need to find one way to say that. So if I need to put something on my Facebook or tweet, that's the only thing I'm going to say. And the Palestinian Hamas apartheid regime in Gaza. That's it. Okay? If they put up their signs, I can put up this sign. And I don't think that you have to memorize a lot to kind of repeat some of this. If someone come and tell you, well, what do you mean? I think it would be very easy for you to repeat some of the things that I've just talked about. So this is example number one. Example number two. there's almost like a debate, people saying, well, Israel have the right of self-defense. And that's something that I took from Elliot a couple of years ago, and I started using it in my own presentations. I'm saying, Israel have the right of self-defense? That's totally the wrong statement. People typically think that I'm crazy. I'm saying that's the wrong thing to say. Because if you have a right of self-defense, when you have the right, it doesn't mean that you have to exercise it. So everybody's saying, okay, even if you have the right, it's disproportionate and all that, you shouldn't use this right. I think we shouldn't use that, then Israel have the right to defend itself. What we should say, Israel has the obligation to defend itself. They don't have an option. They have the obligation to defend itself. Exactly like any other democratic country will have the obligation to defend its civilians, not the right, and the leadership can decide, well, should I protect them or not? No, it's not a right. It's not the issue of the right. It's the obligation. That's what is expected from them. That's example number 2. Just put this one up. Israel have the obligation to defend itself, to make it very clear. Israel doesn't have an option. Right is an option, meaning what to do. When you have the right, you have an option. Obligation, you don't have an option. You have to do that. Third, you're hearing a lot about disproportion. Oh, disproportion, look how many civilians die here, and you have this. And I'm saying the real question is of right and wrong, of good versus evil. Okay? My claim is that in the past, each time that the good was disproportionately strong, it was good for humanity. Right? You want to have disproportion for the good, because by the way, if it is for the good, if it's for the right, they will use this disproportion in the right way, but also the good one, the right one, will end up winning. So I usually hate to use World War II as an example, so I'm not talking about the Holocaust. I want to make it clear. I'm not going to mention the Holocaust. I'm just comparing the disproportion between the US and Germany in World War II, okay? Between these countries. So actually, I contacted the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and I asked them about civilian casualties during World War II. I asked them specifically about US civilians casualties and German civilians, okay? And by the way, one of the slides here was a little bit messy, okay? Here's the email that I received. That's word by word what they sent back to me. They sent back to me, told me, Ilan, nobody has exact figures, but it is estimated that the US had around 12,000 civilian deaths in World War II due to war crimes, military activity, and civilians captured in US possessions such as the Philippines. 12,000. German civilian death from strategic bombing alone, not from ground action, has been estimated between 350,000 and 500,000. Hope these help your research. That's what they sent back to me. And I'm saying, if the same media today that's shouting disproportion, they will look at that and they says, oh, wait, US, you're bad. Look at the disproportion. The victims are Germany, Nazi Germany is the victim. Look, what kind of disproportion you have here. I'm saying, disproportion have nothing to do with the real issue. Disproportion of good over evil is always good for humanity. Because when the good is disproportionately strong, they will use it appropriately. When evil is disproportionately strong, we'll have horrible results. And I hope that that makes sense. So I'm saying, what would I use for that? Here's what I use. If I want to put it in one sentence and I want to put it on Facebook or Twitter, I will say one thing. Disproportion of good, Israel, over evil, Hamas, is always good for humanity. So I don't want to hear about this disproportion anymore. It's not an issue. I actually want the good to be disproportionately strong over the evil, the bad side. And I hope that makes sense. You know, I'm going to stop here for a moment. I have one more example, but I'm actually going to stop here for a moment and switch back to you to see, do you have any questions or feedback on that, on what we just talked about these kind of an examples? Saying, yes.
I'd like to ask two things of you.
Could
Yes,
you
Kathy.
send us those slides? Could you send those slides to us so we have them?
Yeah, Kathy, you have it on my Facebook, by the way, because I decided to recycle them, but I will send that. Okay, I will.
But the ones with the detail.
No, you want the details, or do you want the blue ones, or both?
The details.
Yeah.
I want both.
Okay, you want both.
And then secondly, my daughter really wanted to hear Elliot speak, and she was in a class, and so I'm wondering if you can send the recording.
Yes. And Kathy, by the way, when I'm telling people to use that, don't even use the exact words. Meaning, you all might come out with a shorter. The reason I decided to do that because I realized Palestinians are repeating always three things everywhere. You know, free Palestine, right? Everywhere, exactly the same thing. Very easy, very catchy. And everybody's saying, "Oh, freedom! Of course I will support it, right? It's free." And the occupation, right? Oh, yeah, of course. Who? Meaning occupation sounds bad, right? Short to the point. And they're saying stop apartheid, right? So they have. So that's why I was trying to come up with the short slogans that can kind of counter that. And if anyone come and ask about it, it's easy for us to explain why ours are right and theirs is wrong. Does that make sense? Yes. Was is that something that you can use for? But I want us to keep on posting that. I want us to keep posting exactly the same ones. Some of you again might come out with better ones. That's kind of the trick, that I want to pick up one or two that will pick up on one of them and can present it. Like if even one of these three come, present it, show us 10, 15 minutes, and all of us are going to take what you did and all of us are going to post it at the same time on Tuesday, right? We're going to start creating like kind of a thing that every Tuesday there's something going out. There's something going on, okay? Anybody have any question about D3? Because now I'm going to switch to a totally different type of example, but I want to give you the opportunity if you want to ask or comment about what I have talked about so far.
Ilan, this is Brian.
Yes, Brian. Hi.
I just want to say your proposal and your drafts are wonderful. And I love the idea of everybody contributing to make them maybe more concise, more just, the variance is good. Just as you're describing, Ilan, they have these buzzwords that they use repeatedly and that the mainstream media parrots without thinking, with no critical thought whatsoever. And we need to have the truth, and your approach is perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. Does anybody else have any other comment about that before I'm going to my final example? That is,
I have one,
yes,
sorry.
yes, Diane. Go ahead, Diane.
One comment. The last statement that you made about good versus evil, unfortunately, the evil in America thinks that Israel is more evil than Hamas.
Diane, you're so right. I'm going to share something with you, okay? I'm going to go back to tell you. Originally, my slide just said a disproportion of good over evil is always good for humanity, and I didn't put Israel and Hamas. So you're right. And then I was thinking about it, and I said, well, I think people that know us will know what we're talking about, but others will not.
Yes.
Then I went and then I added nearby the good, I added in parentheses Israel, right? This is exactly to your point, Diane. Thank you so much for bringing it up. So it's another thing that was important for me is to try to think about someone that is not very familiar with the situation. Will they really understand what these short sentences means? For example, I wrote, "and Palestinian Hamas apartheid in Gaza." Originally, all I had is "and Hamas apartheid in Gaza." I can't tell you how many people that are not familiar with the situation told me, "Hamas, that's Israel, isn't it?" They don't know who is who sometimes. Therefore, sometimes you have to make it clear. It's the Palestinian Hamas that has this apartheid regime in Gaza. So Diane, that's very important. So for anyone that doing like something like for next week and the following weeks, always put the glasses on of someone that really doesn't know, that just read the headlines, and things like that. So how do we make it clear? What do we mean by that, but still keeping it short? Thank you so much, Diane. That was a very good point. I appreciate that. Good. Does anyone else have any comment or on D3, or may I go ahead to my last example. Okay, so I'm going to go here and bring up the slide. So now I'm going to bring, everything I showed you so far was talking about us reacting to messages that they have. Israel is an apartheid state. And I'm like, no, really, if you think about it, Hamas is, right? Okay. Hey, this proportion is really bad, make Israel bad. I'm like, no, because Israel is good and democracy and they care about human lives. Actually, it's good that they're the strong ones. Otherwise, it would have been horrible, right? So no, this proportion on the good side is good. It's not there. I have no problem with that. So so I want to bring to you a totally different example. I'm gonna share my screen. And this one is so we can create something that people can talk and being intrigued and ask us about that, okay? Tikkun Olam. So many people don't know that Israel have so many organizations, and I listed them in some of the rallies, and like Save a Child's Heart, that help for free young kids that have a heart defect and that in their countries they cannot get a surgery on this heart. So there's an Israel organization that operate on them. They operate only on non-Israelis, meaning it's something that an Israeli organization do for the world. By the way, about 50% of the kids that are getting this surgery, free surgery, are actually Palestinian kids. People don't know about it. There's another organization called the Israel. Okay, Israel was actually, even the UN acknowledged Israel as an Israeli organization that help the world, not Israelis. There are so many things that they did, like if you remember the earthquake in Haiti, Israel was there, the story about that. Helping Syrian refugees that are trying to flee to Europe and were drowning in the sea when trying to reach to Europe. Israel organization was there to help these Syrian refugees. So many stories about Israel. People don't know about it. There's Innovation Africa, an Israeli organization that go to Africa and help them with getting clear water and power, bringing technology, a self-sufficient technology into these villages. Again, not helping Jews, not helping Israel, helping others. There are so many good things that Israel does, but many times it doesn't show up. There's even a governmental organization called Mashav that's doing a lot of this type of projects. Not even to talk about the hospitals in Israel that took in Lebanese during the Lebanon war, that took in Syrian civilians during the war that they have there right now, right? And was treating Syrians. So even not just non-profit organizations, but even on a government level, Israel is really helping others in a great way. So I was thinking, how can I say that in a way that will trigger people? And bear with me here. Okay, I'm going to show you that little thing that I prepared, and you tell me if that makes sense. I said, if I'll post that, people maybe would like to know more, but the message will be clear. So here's what I wrote. That's what is Tikkun Olam? Repairing the world is Tikkun Olam. Who is Tikkun Olam? Israel is Tikkun Olam. Okay? Just put it out there. Now in the description, you can add, hey, check out Save a Child Heart, look at this video. In the description of that image that you post, or tell people. But this is actually not a reaction to something negative that is being said against Israel by the pro-Palestinian. It's something that we are trying to create to send the real essence and the real things that Israel is doing that others don't know. And just to allow others to learn, so many can connect with it, saying, oh, I even heard Jewish kids saying, oh, we never knew Israel is doing this kind of a thing, right? It's even helped Jewish kids better connect with Israel, because many Jewish kids, what they hear in their synagogues is Tikkun Olam, Tikkun Olam, Tikkun Olam, and they think that Israel has nothing to do with it. And I'm like, no. Israel is Tikkun Olam. Jewish kids will get it faster, but for people that don't know what is Tikkun Olam, that's why I kind of created this slide saying, what is Tikkun Olam? Repairing the world is Tikkun Olam. Who is Tikkun Olam? Israel is Tikkun Olam. Does that make sense? I'm going to stop that now, because next I'm going to ask for volunteers here, or first for feedback about this last one. How did you like this last example that I used? You can unmute yourself, guys, if you want to say something.
I have always liked Tikkun Olam.
Yeah. But you learned about it because we talked about it, right, Nancy?
Yes, that's correct. But I love how you summarize it. It's perfect because it gets them thinking about it. And then I like the part where you say, add the video.
Yes.
Save the heart.
Because many times when you post it on social media, you can put in the description links for different things.
Exactly.
And there are short videos that saying, well, oh, you want to see this already example? Here it is, Save a Child Heart, go here. And that's a short, really heartwarming video about what Save a Child Heart doing. You want to see Israel? Oops, here's a few things. You want to see what they did in Haiti after the earthquake? You can go here. You want to see how they helped the Syrian refugees? You can click here, right? And it's a very short, engaging videos. Same thing about Innovation Africa. All of them have these videos that we can actually help just spread the word. Says, guys, let's talk about these good things that Israel is doing instead of always just being on the defensive side, which were my first three sides, right? I was reacting to what they say. I'm saying, no, I want to be proactive. What the messages that I want to send about Israel?
How about how about the humanitarian efforts from Israel in Gaza, and how are they going to work into this proposed Marshall Plan? I mean, they were helping even during the rocket launches.
Yeah. And again, the whole thing, that will fit perfectly into Tikkun Olam. Because people said, what do you mean? Says, yeah, you see, Israel is a good one that deals with Tikkun Olam, but repairing the world. When Gaza is broken, actually Israel helped repair it. Right? That will, people, their mind will get, what do you mean? Says, well, that's a concept that you have in Israel. To make the world a better place, repair the world, even if it means when the war ended, the actual campaign ended with our enemy, we actually go and help the civilian as we can. Andy, thank you so much for that. It's good to have a professor on the call. You bring good examples, huh? And Andy, by the way, when I was talking about the official statements, that statement that you forwarded to me, was that from St. Thomas University or University of Minnesota about anti-Semitism?
My goodness, it was from Joan Gable, president of the University of Minnesota. And,
all right.
You know, that's an example. I mean, I should write to her and say, we really appreciate your statement against anti-Semitism. And there's another example of that I think people should write to, and that is that the CNN newscaster who has green eyes and a green thing on, she just nailed the ambassador from one of the foreign countries and said that statement is anti-Semitic, and she didn't backtrack. I think people ought to say, we appreciate your objectivity and how you did that to her.
Good.
I agree, Professor.
Good. Okay, so now I need 1 or 2 volunteers for next week. Someone have to come like with a, you can pick one of these 4, just study it, present it yourself again. You can use some of the same points. You can change my wording a little bit. But one thing I'll tell you is that we will be ready next week then, that all of us are just going to post exactly the same thing. The one that 1 or 2 of you are going to work on, and we're all going to spread it next Tuesday evening. Because we're all on our computers anyway, aren't we? So we can do it right there. So do I have any volunteer or 2 to decide that you can do something to present? Again, I will help you if you need help. I'm sure Joanne will be happy to help you. You can ask Deb too. So don't feel intimidated. See that as a good exercise. You're among friends. Any volunteers? Uh-oh.
I'll volunteer.
All right, Debbie, here we go. Anybody? Okay, Debbie, and you can pick one of the 4 that we did, or maybe something else that you have in your head. Meaning,
Well, I like the one that we just finished. I just want to expound on that one.
Good. So you want to work on Tikkun Olam, right? On the positive message of Tikkun
Yeah.
Olam, right? And I
And
can
is
help
my-
you with that. And
Okay.
since by the way, it's a really, really, really fun thing to do. So does anyone want to join Debbie and work on it as a team?
Is my sister Linda on the line?
Linda, do you have a microphone on?
Volunteer her. She may have
So,
died.
Debbie, you're feeling comfortable working with Linda on that?
Yes.
Okay. What's Linda's last name?
Loesch.
Yes, she's on, but I don't know if she has a mic. She doesn't have a microphone that can work, I think. Maybe that's the,
Okay.
yeah, I can see that she's on, but sometimes the audio is not connected well. So Debbie, if you need help, I will help you with that. I will be more than happy to set up a time with you.
Okay.
Next couple of days, you tell me which day work for you.
Okay.
We will work on it together and get
Okay.
to present next Tuesday.
Okay.
We all want to be ready because what we're all going to do next Tuesday then, when we have that meeting, right, after they present, we're all going to take that and post exactly the same thing and start spreading it, that Israel is Tikkun Olam, right? Have
The ones after 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 the ones.
Okay, now it's not going to happen again because I actually disallowed anyone to unmute themselves. Joanne, I think you might have a button or something that click itself all the time and unmuting yourself, and it's somehow creating this echo. So everybody else, be ready, because next week we're going to have 10-15 minutes presentation about Tikkun Olam. So we all know when we say Israel is Tikkun Olam, when you go to a person, tell them, you know, Israel is Tikkun Olam. You're going to say, well, what do you mean by that? You'll know what to tell them, right? And we can also, we'll have that maybe same type of one that we have. What is Tikkun Olam? Repairing the world is Tikkun Olam. Who is Tikkun Olam? Israel is Tikkun Olam, okay? So you can decide to use it, but be ready for that. We will try to push it next week and send positive messages about Israel and maybe to create kind of a little movement starting here. And I will try to do my best to post it in all the different groups and pages and friends that I have. And I hope that thing will keep on spreading. And the whole idea is, again, every week to hear at least once something about Israel that a lot of people pushing at the same time. Does that make sense? Or am I just being stupid? Can someone here tell me if it's actually, you know what? I'm going to try now. I'm going to allow you to unmute because we're going to repeat. Joanne, I hope your microphone is not going to do it now. Okay. So if anyone want to say anything before we wrap up?
No, this is an excellent idea.
Yeah.
It's what, we're learning, and it really puts it into practice. It might feel super uncomfortable, but as you said, Ilan, we're all friends, right?
Yeah. Right. And I'm going to help you.
Yeah, we'll just get it figured out. And Linda did respond. She's on board. She was just unable to unmute herself.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yep.
Good. Wonderful. So thank you. Does anybody want to say anything about anything before we wrap up? Because I'm going to ask Joanne soon to wrap up with a prayer about everything that we have done today, because it's always warmed my heart to hear Joanne or Deb, my Christian friends. They're always doing it in such an appropriate way that is good for the Jewish guests and the Christian guests. But it's just it's really great. Now, by the way, I see someone here wrote, can we have a t-shirt to wear too? That's a good idea. We'll try to figure it out with our
The ones after 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 the ones.
Joanne, you still have a microphone problem there.
Back to
Joanne.
back to Sunday rally. It was.
Hi, Gedali. How are you, Gedali?
I'm fine. I was on Sunday on 394 in Louisiana.
Yes.
And I saw a gentleman with big camera doing kind of recording. Is it possible to see what he recorded and have a copy of it? I would like to share with my family and friends.
Yes, absolutely. I'm actually, I got it. I received it. And I'm planning to edit it down a little bit, to make it just that it's not, maybe even to add subtitles, because, it was very noisy there when we were with the cars and everything. So I am planning on making a video of that with all of you. So if all of you are getting my emails, if there's anybody here that doesn't get my email, if you don't get,
Ilan,
yes,
Ilan,
yes,
it's
yes,
Carol. I
yes,
want to
hi.
say something to Gadali. Happy
Okay.
birthday, Gadali.
Happy birthday, Gadali.
Thank you.
Thank
How
you, Carol.
know? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Nice.
Did everybody here actually received an email from me? Right? That's why you're here. If someone didn't, just write to me in the chat and I will make sure to send it to you. And so I don't know what to do. By the way, Deb had to jump off for a moment here. She sent me a message. Joanne, can you try to disconnect and then call back in? Should be just disconnect the Zoom. And it just warmed my heart every time when I hear Joanne and or Deb kind of wrapping up everything.
I agree, Ilan. I love to hear them pray.
Yeah. So I hope she'll be able to reconnect. I hope that will solve the problem. I think it might be, I saw her trying to use her phone. And if she was using her phone and computer at the same time, that's what usually will cause the problem. Here we go. Joanne is back in. Okay, Joanne, try to unmute yourself. And if the echo is on, that means you have another device. Joanne, do you have your phone with you, near you? Yeah, I don't know. Joanne, it looks like you might have a problem then with your computer. I'm sorry about that. So everybody, it's 8:50 p.m. I'm sorry that we cannot have Joanne wrapping up with a prayer, but she will be ready for next week, right, Joanne? Don't unmute, just do with your head, because when you unmute, we have it echo back. Deb emailed me that she had to jump off, so I don't think she's on. So I want to thank you all. If anyone have any question or comment, please go ahead and do it now. And if not, I just want to thank all of you for joining me. I hope you find it worthwhile your time. And I hope to see you again next week. Thank you all so much and God bless you. Thank you.